I'm John Peter Springer Ford, and I grew up in the North Haven area of New Albany. I was born in September of 1992 in Tupelo. Originally, my family lived in Ripley, Mississippi for the first year or so of my life before moving to New Albany. My dad took a job as the vocational director, Jackie Ford, around 91, 92. And that is what brought our family to New Albany. My mom, Sandra Ford, worked at Northeast Mississippi Community College as the director of the Child Development Program and also taught nutrition courses during this time period before her retirement. Growing up in New Albany, I attended first that I remember Maddie Thompson Elementary School. I remember my kindergarten teacher being Miss Tammy Dobbs and Hattie McKenzie. And they like to tell stories when they see me now that I was not exactly the kid that wanted to be in school all the time. And there would be times that my mom would drop me off at kindergarten and I would be hanging onto the steering wheel of her car as she was trying to drag me out of the car to get me into the classroom. But I have very fond memories of kindergarten at Maddie Thompson and first grade at Maddie Thompson and all kinds of events at Maddie Thompson. I remember many times breakfast at Maddie Thompson. Miss Bramlett, who was the principal at the time, would come around with bottles of jelly, and always apple jelly, sometimes grape jelly, and she would ask if anybody wanted jelly on their sausage and biscuit. And I always loved to get the apple jelly on my sausage and biscuit. When I was in first grade at Maddie Thompson, I had a rotating group of teachers. I don't exactly remember who they all were, but we did have a lot of fun in my first grade class and on the playground at Maddie Thompson with the merry-go-round and the big caterpillar thing and all kinds of events. From Maddie Thompson, I went to B.F. Ford in second grade, where I had Miss McCollum, Sandra McCollum, and I went through B.F. Ford second, third, and fourth grade, and second and third grade only, because by the time that I reached fourth grade, the new elementary school had opened, and so everybody had transitioned to the new elementary school for pre-K through fifth grade at that point in time, and my fourth grade class was the first fourth grade class at the New Albany Elementary School. Went through fifth grade there, and then sixth grade I went to the middle school and went through sixth, seventh, and eighth grade at the middle school. There at the middle school, I was first involved in sixth grade in the middle school chorus with Miss Vicki Harmon. Which at that point in time, and still is today, an oddity for a sixth grade student to be involved in middle school choirs, because MHSAA only begins with seventh grade. And so she had to petition the state to allow me to join in sixth grade. And the state allowed me because by the time that I arrived at New Albany Middle School, I had been singing with the Mississippi Boy Choir for 2 seasons at that point in time. I think my sixth grade year was my third season to sing with the Mississippi Boy Choir. And I began singing with the Mississippi Boy Choir due to Walt Henson. And Walt had been singing with the Mississippi Boy Choir for a year or two prior, and his mother had told my mother about it, and I ended up auditioning with Margaret Thompson, who was the artistic director and the founding director of the Mississippi Boy Choir, and I was offered a position within the Mississippi Boy Choir. And that, I guess, is where, not necessarily where I got my first start in singing, because I sang at First Baptist Church, which is where I grew up, in the children's choirs, but I really blossomed in the Mississippi Boy Choir in the time that I sang there, and had so many wonderful trips, times, and adventures with that group, traveling all over the state, traveling all over the United States, singing the national anthem at Atlanta Braves games. I know we did that once, maybe twice. We also did a world festival for singing in Minnesota, St. Cloud, Minnesota, where there were choirs of boys and men that came from all over the world, and I got to work with some world-class conductors and composers and arrangers during that time. That was my first experience working with a British conductor by the name of Edward Higginbottom, whose music today I thoroughly adore and enjoy, and my conducting philosophy today is based on that of Edward Higginbottom very much, and his style, his British style of conducting in choirs. But also in middle school, I was involved in the band when in sixth grade, and I had a wonderful group of band directors all throughout middle school, Buddy Edge, Brenda Cole, Mike Langley, Suzanne Cheeseman, Brian Cheeseman, and a couple of others whose names I sometimes forget, but it was always a lot of fun, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and many of those people that I went through band with in middle school ended up staying in band in high school. And as I transitioned to high school, I ended up doing more choirs, more bands, and during this time period, I was also involved with the Boy Scouts of America, Troop 222, and our scoutmaster was Cliff Pannell, and I did receive my Eagle Scout when I was in high school, but I had a lot of fun in the Boy Scouts, going through camping trips, helping plan camping trips, learning all kinds of life lessons, learning about community citizenship, United States citizenship, world citizenship, how to be a better leader, how to be a better person, how to be just better in general. And it was through Troop 222 and going to summer camp that I ended up working at Camp Yokna in Takapola, Mississippi, and kind of following in the footsteps of my two older brothers, Mark Ford and Daniel Ford, and who both of them had gone through Troop 222 under Cliff Pannell and had also worked at Camp Yokna. And that is, during this time period, I was also elected into the Order of the Arrow, and both of my older brothers were in the Order of the Arrow, and I quickly rose through the ranks to be a Vigil Honor member, which is the highest rank you can achieve in the Order of the Arrow as well. And both my older brothers are also Vigil Honor members, as well as Eagle Scouts. And the life lessons that I learned within the Boy Scouts have really stuck with me today. And I don't think there's any substitute for an organization like that. And I'm so glad to see that today it still flourishes, and the membership has been opened up to so many more people than it was when I was going through it. Also, during high school, I started doing a lot of theater and working with a lot more community theater. I had been involved with the Tallahatchie River Players. I first got involved with them in the production of It's a Wonderful Life. my brother Daniel's first production with them had been one prior to that, Father of the Bride, which was directed by Barry Wise. And It's a Wonderful Life, I believe, was directed by Evelyn Mason, if memory serves correct. But I played young George Bailey in that. And I remember we had to manufacture an arm brace, because in one of the scenes, young George Bailey is hit on the arm by Mr. McGower, I think, who the chemist who owns the pharmacist shop in town, when the pharmacist himself messes up an order, and George doesn't deliver it because he knows that the order is incorrect and it's a poisonous order. And so when he finally tells the pharmacist that, he ends up saying, "Oh, thank you, you've saved my job, you've saved a life." And that ended up being a very fun production. Rick Robbins was George Bailey, old George Bailey, I guess you could say. And there were a lot of other wonderful people in that cast, but that kind of ignited my partnership with the Tallahatchie River Players, as they were known at the time. And I was heavily involved with them going forward. I got the opportunity to be a part of the Diary of Anne Frank, and working with that with Stanley Wise and a few other people, it just really ignited my passion for theater. In high school, I was involved with three of the 4 high school musicals. My 9th grade year, we did a high school musical. My 10th grade year, I was unfortunately unable to participate in Beauty and the Beast, as I was traveling with the Boy Scouts internationally. I was selected to participate in an exchange program with the Scouting Association of Japan, and I would be gone during, I think, the last production of Beauty and the Beast, and it didn't make sense for me to do two productions and then have somebody else do the third production to fill in for me. And so I ended up having to not do that year, my sophomore year. But on that trip, we were renewing a peace accord between the Boy Scouts of America and the Scouting Association of Japan that had started during the Bill Clinton presidential era. So this was 2009, and the accord had maybe started in maybe the late 90s, mid to late 90s, so sometime during that period. And that was a very fun trip. Even got to meet the Japanese Prime Minister and have an audience with him, and have an audience with other cabinet ministers of Japan during that time period. Traveled all over Japan. The time period we were there, early to mid-February, the cherry blossoms were in bloom, and we hiked as high as we could on Mount Fuji. They had about half of it closed off because of the snow caps on the mountain, so there was only so much you could do on that trip. But that was really a life-changing experience. We ended up staying in the Olympic Village in Japan, and the food was interesting. But I remember on that trip staying with host families, and one of the things we had to do was take gifts for our host families, and one of the gifts I took was a pottery bowl. And how you travel internationally with pottery in a checked bag is can be very challenging sometimes, but you can do it. But I remember giving them this big pottery bowl, and it had drainage holes in the bottom, and the time we were also there is the time when fresh strawberries are in season, and the strawberries that are grown in the volcanic soil of Japan grow very big. They're almost like the size of the palm of your hand, and they're very sweet. Since then, I've never had anything like that, but I remember I gave this bowl to the host family, and they ended up bringing it back out after dinner, just piled full of strawberries and fresh whipped cream. And it was a wonderful experience with that. But they ended up taking the other Boy Scout and me to the church that they go to every so often. And I remember picking up the hymnal and flipping through it, and it came time to sing a hymn, and I thought, I know this hymn, I know the hymn tune, and they were singing it in English, and I thought I recognized the words somewhat, and I ended up looking at the bottom of the page, because most hymnals have the hymn tune and the other information, composer and text author at the bottom of the page, and I looked, and I remember that being a hymn tune entitled The Ash Grove, which is a popular American hymn tune. And it was very interesting and so much fun to be in Japan and recognize that American hymn tunes had been traveling backwards and forwards to Japan for really, now that I look back and I know more about how the mission hymns in especially the Presbyterian church work, which Japan had a lot more Presbyterian missions than any other denomination, it makes a lot of sense, because this was a Presbyterian congregation, and this was actually a Presbyterian hymnal from the United States. So there are all kinds of threads that come out of that. But so going back to high school, my junior year, the musical was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, I do believe.
I think that's right.
Yes. Now I have to remember what the one my senior year was. But I think my junior year was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
It was either your junior year or your senior year.
Yeah, it was either my junior year or senior year. Now that's really going
So
good.
what's the other one?
So Jason Carson directed the orchestra for Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. So it was my junior year. Jason Carson was the band director, head band director at the time. And I remember having long discussions with him about the music for that. So yes, it was that, and I played the role of Potiphar.
My favorite.
And I was still involved somewhat with the Tallahatchie River Players during this time, and doing a lot of work with them. And I had also met along this way, because we had done a Christmas carol at some point in time. I think that was when I was in middle school. But I had still stayed involved with the Tallahatchie River Players, and I had met a lady who was originally from New York by the name of Paulina Dennis. And I count her with a lot of my love for theater and a lot of my love for performing arts, because she would say, she once told me, if you find that you have an itch for it, go and do and figure it out. And so that's, I took that advice, and every time that I would do something or I got a creative itch, I would go to her and I would show her stuff, and she would come right back and say, yes, but have you thought about this, or have you thought about this, or think about it like this, think about it like this, or, just encouragement and just constant going forward, and say, keep on, keep on, keep on. And I really credit her. And I know during my high school years, she served on the board for the Tallahatchie River Players. And I know she did up through my 11th grade, 12th grade year. And then my senior year in high school, the musical was Bye Bye Birdie.
Right.
Yes. And that was the first year that that they had gotten Billy Eubanks to come back out of retirement to be the band director, because the band had been going through a very rocky time over the last couple of years. Numbers had been dwindling somewhat, and they needed somebody to kind of steady the ship and try to get things moving in some kind of a direction again. And tensions always abound no matter what. But I credit all of my band directors with so much inspiration, from Billy Eubanks to Jason Carson, and all of the other assistants, Andy Hall, and others whose names escape me all the time. But so my senior musical was Bye Bye Birdie. That was a lot of fun, very interesting show by Charles Strauss, I think. And about that same time, the Tallahatchie River Players were having a board elections, and I ended up being put forth to serve on the board of the Tallahatchie River Players. And since I knew that from New Albany High School I was going to end up going to Northeast Mississippi Community College, I said, well, I'll just go ahead and do it. And so I ended up serving on the board for the Tallahatchie River Players. And that was the very end of my senior year, going into my very first year at Northeast Mississippi Community College. And I really credit Paulina Dennis with that, because she really encouraged me, and a lot of the other board members encouraged me. And when it came time for our next season with the Tallahatchie River Players, we had a show that we were going to do. And for some reason, I don't remember who was originally supposed to direct it, but our original director ended up not being able to do it. And so I ended up just stepping in and saying, you know what, I'll do it. And it was a show, and looking back, I probably should have never said yes to it, but sometimes we say yes to things that we don't always think about. But it was a show called Radio Days, and it was set in the 1940s in a radio station that broadcast a live radio soap opera. And it was a hot mess express for a myriad of reasons. I did have a wonderful supporting group of people that helped me with it. And I cannot say enough about them throughout the time that I worked with the Tallahatchie River Players. Renee Reed, who I worked with on so many children's productions. The first one I helped her with was Alice in Wonderland, which was the little kids' productions, the younger children's productions. And I remember looking at her one time and saying, we have a scene change where we're supposed to get 100 flowers on stage, and 75 of them are first graders. And then another production I worked with Renee on was The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which was right before Radio Days, and I was her lead assistant director on that show. We had a lot of fun with that show. And Austin Fitz played Tom Sawyer, and no, not Tom Sawyer. Austin Fitz played Mark Twain, and Austin Fitz's sister, Allie, played Tom Sawyer, which is an interesting casting choice, but it is not so much when you think about theater, because theater has a long history of girls playing boys and boys playing girls, and so it just really fit right in. And the amount of times that I've actually seen that exact script of Tom Sawyer being produced, I've never seen anybody that I thought was a better Tom Sawyer than Allie Fitz. But the wonderful people that we had working on that show with us was amazing. I remember we had a preacher from out and going towards Oxford. I forget his name, but he played banjo and a couple of other old-time instruments. And we needed somebody, or I needed somebody to help provide some underscoring and music for the show and old-time fiddle tunes, and he was the perfect person to do it. And absolutely wonderful. And the amount of just amazing things and amazing connections that happened during that show that set me up to be able to have the success that I had with Radio Days was wonderful. But Radio Days had a cast of maybe around 40 people, 45 people, and we had a couple of characters. I remember there was one of the leading characters that we cast somebody in. He was there for half the rehearsals, maybe a little over half, and then decided he was going to quit. Which, as a director, that just kind of throws you into a tizzy. I never thought that auditions for that show would ever end. But community theater, sometimes you don't have a full cast until the final dress rehearsal, and that's how it goes sometimes. But Radio Days was my first experience working with, I call her a local legend, Donna Cobb. And Donna Cobb ended up working with me in a number of shows that I did with the Tallahatchie River Players. In fact, that when we were doing Radio Days, I got the opportunity to direct the winning play that year for the William Faulkner literary competition. It was a play called Old Friends, based on the Neil Simon song. And I remember reading over Renee Reed gave me the script and said, "I don't think you're going to like this." And I said, "Renee, why?" And she said, "Because I didn't like it. I went to sleep reading it." And I ended up reading it, and I called her up and I said, "Renee, this is the most boring script I've ever read in my life." And I apologize if whoever wrote that is watching this video. But you make lemonade out of lemons if you can. And Donna ended up playing one of the roles in it, and I ended up getting one of the other people from Radio Days to play the other role. And the chemistry that they ended up developing, it was set in Central Park on a park bench for 30 minutes. Just two old people sitting talking about life. And I remember in one of the rehearsals, Paulina Dennis was there with me, and she looked at me and she said, "Have you ever thought about using the trees from Alice in Wonderland and just reimagining this as if it's a fever dream?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And she said, "Let's do it." So the next rehearsal, we brought out the trees, we did it. It worked. And then suddenly she said, "What if we had birds?" And I said, "Let's do it." And so she had bird puppets and brought in a couple of people to do kabuki bird puppet theater behind them. And I remember about a week later, somebody wrote a review of the production because it happened during the Tallahatchie River Fest. Somebody wrote a review of that production at that point in time, we still had the New Albany News Exchange. And I remember the review stating, while the script was not the best, the imagining of the setting and the way that the Kabuki Theater interacted with everything else brought an entirely new life to the show. And at that moment in time, as a director, you're sitting there thinking, everything we did to make this a little bit more interesting has brought more life to it. But after Radio Days, which turned out to be a rather nice, I think a rather nice success, the Tallahatchie River Players did their first, I call it they had done musicals in the past, but they did their first musical with a full pit orchestra, which was You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. And we had a lot of fun doing that. Austin Fitz was in it, Allie Fitz, Donna Cobb was in it, playing Woodstock, and did a kind of a tap dance number. And I remember in one of the rehearsals, I was trying to help choreograph this number, and I don't dance whatsoever, and I was trying to help choreograph, and it really wasn't a tap dance number. It was more like a dance number with a top hat and a cane and a feather boa, and I was trying to choreograph this number, mock kick line and everything else, and I went to kick up a leg, and my other leg went out from under me, and here I am with a top hat and a cane and a feather boa just rolling down the platform risers on the stage. And boa feathers are going everywhere. And I finally come to a sudden arboreal stop at the foot of the stage. And Donna Cobb walks down and stands over me and looks at me and says, "Are you okay?" Poking me with her cane.
And were you?
Yes, I was. But we had a lot of fun the time during my membership on the board with the Tallahatchie River Players. And that was the first time in the history of the Tallahatchie River Players that they were able to support themselves without any support from the city. And that worked for a little while, and I rotated off the board probably 2015, 2016, so about the time that I left Northeast to go to Mississippi State. And while I was at Northeast, I was involved I originally started at Northeast in forestry and environmental sciences before switching to music education. But I was always involved with the chamber choir and concert choir at Northeast, and the few musical dinner theater productions there I was heavily involved in. In fact, we did a production of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown as a dinner theater at Northeast. At the time, two other New Albany natives were involved in that production, that dinner theater production. Lindy Stokes and Christopher Smith were, so three out of the 6 members of the cast, 3 of them were from New Albany and graduated from New Albany High School. So I guess New Albany represented at Northeast that time. So, and from Northeast, I ended up at Mississippi State University, where I was heavily involved in the music department and a little bit in the theater department, not so much, but I I sang in the Men of State Glee Club. I was also the student conductor for the Men of State Glee Club for about 2 years. While I was there, I sang in the State Singers, which was at that point in time the top chamber choir of the university, and we traveled all over the southern United States doing tours. I sang in the University Chorale and a couple of other ensembles while I was there, and we had an amazing faculty. Dr. Gary Packwood, who sadly just recently passed away, Peter Infanger, and a little bit, there was another New Albany native who is now currently on faculty at Mississippi State, Anna Catherine Ragsdale. I think she was there a little bit during my time at Mississippi State. And but during that time, I was also heavily involved in Phi Mu Alpha Symphonia Fraternity. And during my time in Phi Mu Alpha, I rose very quickly through the leadership ranks, and I highly connect that to my time in the Boy Scouts, especially through Troop 222 and Cliff Panel. And I very quickly became the fraternity education officer, which was the pledge master of the fraternity. I was the vice president, the treasurer, and finally I was the president of the fraternity, of our chapter. And at the time that I ascended the presidency of the chapter itself was dwindling. We had gone through a period of bad things. We had a few issues with a couple of members that had scared off a large recruiting class, and just things had dwindled. And tooth and nail, I fought as the president to keep the chapter afloat and to keep it moving until the point where we could actually recruit, or until we were in a position to where we could recruit. And at my spring semester, where in the past we had only had very small recruitment classes, in the spring semester we ended up having our largest recruitment class that we had had in 2 years. And things began to turn around for the chapter, and I used a lot of those skills that I learned through the Boy Scouts, learned working with community theater here, and learned from people here in New Albany to get that turned around and get that moving in a different direction. From Mississippi State, I ended up taking my first teaching position down in Picayune, Mississippi, where I oversaw a program that consisted of junior high and high school choirs, and had a lot of fun there for 2 years. And one of my dreams had always been, and still is, to teach and live internationally. And I found a position that opened up in China. And so I decided, you only live once, let's go ahead and, jump off the deep end and see what happens. And ended up applying for the position. I had no idea that I would ever get this position. But at that time, I was given the choice of 2 positions. I was offered a position in Malaysia, and I was offered a position in China. And both of them were doing the exact same thing pretty much. And I remember having a conversation with my principal voice teacher at Mississippi State, and he said, if I were you, I would go to Malaysia because at least the signs will be in English. And you can figure out where you are. And like I am sometimes, I don't listen. And so I just went to China. And I ended up having a better benefits package and better opportunities in China. And it turned out to be, for me, a better opportunity, I think. And I ended up in China in 2019, in September of 2019. So this is PC, pre-COVID, as I like to say. And I oversaw there a program that consisted of band, International Baccalaureate Music Program, and also I started the first choir that school had in ever. And I worked with wonderful teachers. The one that I still keep in contact with all of the people I worked with, but one of the ones that sticks out very much in my head even to this day was our theater teacher, Ruth Ann Pilton, who comes from a long line of performing artists. Her mother worked on Broadway for a little bit, and her mother's brother was very big in TV shows during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. In fact, he was in what I like to say a little-known TV show called Hogan's Heroes, in a few episodes of that. But working with Ruth Ann and the other people I worked with was amazing. There would be mornings where we would walk in, or days where Ruth Ann would just start a rousing chorus of Oklahoma, and then me and a couple of other people would just start joining and just screaming at the top of our lungs.
So you had to come home.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes. So we were going on the memories of this event. Everything kind of runs together, even for the other people I worked with, and it started. We had just gotten back from our winter break, and we had, I think, maybe 2 weeks, 2.5 to 3 weeks between winter break and the Chinese New Year break, and we got a notification through email one day from the State Department. If you were signed up for the State Department email listserv list, that said something along the lines of a pneumonia-like virus has been detected in Wuhan, or in this province of China. Caution is encouraged. And, we didn't think anything of it. And none of the other, like our local Chinese staff, really didn't think anything of it. We were wearing masks, but not because of any virus or anything, but because of the air pollution. There would be days the air pollution would be so bad, when you would breathe in, it felt like you could feel the air pollution going down your throat and into your lungs. There were days that it was so bad the airport had to shut down operations for a period of time until the smog could lift. And so really we didn't think anything about it. And so we just went on with our daily lives doing what we did. And it wasn't until maybe the week of that we were getting ready to break for Chinese New Year that we figured, or that we first got the hint that it maybe was a little bit worse. And this was all in January of 2020. So this was long before really anybody in the United States kind of had any inkling of how bad COVID was going to end up being, or anything like that. So we get a couple more messages like that from the State Department, and they become a little bit more worrying, because they will say things along the lines of the virus has been tracked to Wuhan, and then you start seeing things on the Chinese news with people like the beds in hospitals and all kinds of things, and then I think I remember us, a group of teachers, we were sitting at the lunch table, and if you've taught, you know how teacher lunch conversations go sometimes. And we were sitting in the lunch table in the cafeteria, and at this point in time, it was the day it was the day before break, and we were sitting there joking about, who's going to go to Wuhan and be infected with a virus and bring it back and inoculate all of us. Just having
never
that,
knowing.
never knowing what was around the next corner. And so people were, getting ready to have a week off for Chinese New Year. Nobody was really going to travel anywhere. This was on a Thursday at lunch. By Friday morning, we had gotten an email from our school director that had said, something along the lines of be prepared to teach 1 week online after Chinese New Year. And so we're all like, oh, and in our group chat, we're all going, oh, this is probably a little bit more serious than we think it is.
A little.
And, you know, once again, we're like, oh, it's only going to be a week online, so, you know, this too shall pass. Well, about another day later is when all panic in China really starts to break loose, and that's when they start really requiring masks. And what kind of tipped some of us off is some of us went out one night, and as we were walking into the restaurant bar, they were doing temperature checks. And that was when we knew that it was a little bit more worrisome than we had anticipated. And as the days progressed throughout the Chinese New Year break, we might have had 2 weeks off for Chinese New Year. Yeah, I think it was 2 weeks. But as the days began to progress, things began to get worse and worse and worse. Places started having to close. I remember being at a restaurant bar with a group of teachers, and the Chinese police came in and shut down the bar and ran everybody out and said this place is now closed. And they were doing it to every place. Even street vendors were being shut down just to try to contain the spread. And it got so bad that even cabs were no longer running. They were beginning to close down public transportation, and that was the point in time that we all kind of had the thought, if we're going to leave, we need to do it in the next 24 hours. And so a lot of us began to plan our exit, thinking, you know, we'll be back in a few weeks, thinking this is just to, you know, clamp down the spread. It won't be near as bad. And I remember arriving in Seattle on my flight. The flight crew came over the intercom and said, don't tell anybody. If anybody asks where you came from, unless they are passport control, do not tell them. They said passport control are the only people that need to know where you came from and what plane you got off of. And I ended up standing next to somebody at the luggage carousel who works for the US government, who is stationed in China, that works in like epidemiology and stuff like that. And we were having a conversation, and I remember making the comment, oh, we'll be back. It's not going to be that big of a deal. And he said, I hope you packed up your entire apartment and brought it with you, because there's not going to be an end in sight for this. So.
And did you just pack a bag?
I just packed a bag.
So all your stuff was left there?
Yeah, I just packed a couple of bags, put what I thought that I would need for 3 weeks in it, and brought it back. I put kind of the most important things that I thought that I would need, and left everything else behind. Not long after that, we ended up taking a few extra weeks off to regroup everything with the school, and the rest of the year was taught entirely online. Everything was moved online with the school. Performing arts, everything. All of us that left and didn't go back are the ones that were being transferred to other schools within our company system. All of their bags, their entire apartments were packed, what could be shipped out of the country. and they were packed and shipped to us. So most of everything in my apartment I was able to get back. There were very few things that I was unable to get back.
So when that school year ended, what did you do?
I
You're back in the United States.
So when I left my undergraduate, my plan was I'm going to teach for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years I'm going to begin a master's degree, whether I'm teaching or not. And that was my hard and fast plan. And I mainly used that I said that because when I was doing my undergraduate in my final semester, I auditioned for a couple of conducting programs, got into all of the ones I was accepted to, got scholarships to all of them, and after conversations with my 2 mentors at the time, Gary Packwood and J. Bruce Leslie, both of them suggested that if it was them, they would take 3 years, figure out exactly what you want to do within the field of music or whatever, and then take the next step. And that is what I did. I had long conversations with the art teacher whose room was next door to mine, who is still today a good friend of mine, even though we don't keep in touch that very much, mainly sending reels on Instagram somewhat. Which reminds me, I need to look at the one he sent me the other day and send one back. But I had a conversation with him about it, and I had told him that I had I had an interest in musicology, which I've always had an interest in history and historical research, and not just dates, facts, figures, and things like that, but the trends. How did we get to things? How do we, the ideas, and how do they shape and how do they form, and that type of situation, and the theories, and how do we apply those theories. And so with looking at doing a master's degree, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And so I emailed my one of my other mentors at Mississippi State, Dr. James Sabaski, who was also my official undergraduate advisor at the time, and I set up a meeting with him and spoke with him about it, and he said, do it. And by this point in time, when I had come back, when I was thinking about doing a master's degree in musicology, so this would have been very end of January, very beginning of February, before the shutdowns and everything happened, I had already had a meeting with Thomas Peaty at the University of Mississippi, who is on the musicology faculty there, about what would it take to do a master's in musicology, going and all of that. So I had already had my foot in the door in musicology there, and I just decided, I can go into teaching again, or I can do musicology, and if I go into teaching, I'm still going to want to do an online or summer's master's program in something, in music education or teacher education or something. And I ended up applying for, I know 3 or 4 different master's programs in musicology. The 2 main ones that I was interested in were LSU and Ole Miss, and I got into every one that I applied for. And I also applied for a whole slew of teaching jobs again. And I ended up receiving a couple of offers from those. And I remember middle of June having a conversation with the principal and saying, I would like to, if you can give me 2 days. I'm waiting to hear back to see if I get into this master's program. and I'm trying to weigh my options. And he said, well, I really need a response in 24 hours. And I said, I said, in 24 hours, if I haven't heard from the master's degree program, I can give you a response, whether it's the response you want or the one you don't want, but I can give you a response in 24 hours. So 24 hours passed, hadn't heard from either one of the master's degree programs that I really wanted into at that point in time. So I finally just said, you know what, I'm going to put it in God's hands, and I'm going to say no to the teaching job. And within 24 more hours, I had received an offer from LSU. And I made mention of that to the graduate coordinator at the University of Mississippi in the School of Music, and then suddenly I received an offer from Ole Miss as well. And I ended up at Ole Miss because I knew that going in, at least for the first little bit, I might have to pay out of pocket, and in-state tuition looks a lot better than out-of-state tuition. And I knew that I could get scholarships from various avenues at Ole Miss better than LSU. And I ended up getting a good bit of scholarships at Ole Miss from various parts of the music program. I was involved in the choirs there, and with Don Trott, I was involved in various other things on campus during my time at Ole Miss. I was involved in the Graduate Student Senate as the senator for the School of Music, and the Graduate Student Senate, with their all-knowing power, ended up voting me as the Senate parliamentarian. But at Ole Miss, I ended up receiving a lot of grants for my research work on the comic opera Tabasco, which is based on the hot sauce. The hot sauce is a plot point. Which I had seen Tabasco a long time ago, the first restructured version of it. It had been lost for 115, 120 years, buried in a trunk. Paul Maffray, a New Orleans-based conductor, had resurrected it into a performing edition. And I wanted to take it into a critical edition to where I analyze every aspect about the show. Because it went through many different changes in its very short lifespan. And I wanted to look at every change it went through. Why did it have this change? What was going on? Did the composer, did the librettist agree with this change? Did they make the change? Who made the change? And so in working on my master's thesis, that's exactly what I looked at. And there were lost musical numbers from it that I spent hours and hours in archives tracking down on emails and phone calls. I was able to find things that Paul had not been able to find, and all of that, a good bit of that is cataloged in my master's thesis at Ole Miss, and that really laid the groundwork for the critical edition of Tabasco that I would complete. But all of my intensive archival work on Tabasco led to me deciding, you know what, I'm going to just continue on and do my PhD, and I ended up once again applying for LSU. And the University of Florida ended up in there, and a few other places. University of Georgia, I guess you could say that I'm trying to make the SEC rounds here. And I ended up going to the University of Florida. They ended up making me the best offer out of everything, and down there I didn't leave my work on Tabasco behind. In fact, it was at Florida that I completed the critical edition of Tabasco. And I discovered that there were even more faults with my critical edition, that I knew that there were going to be some faults because I cannot have it every way that I want, but there were a lot of faults that I wish that, and one day I will fix, because with the show having so many iterations, 3 main iterations within itself, it needs 3 separate critical editions. And I only had time to do one. But at the University of Florida, our choir club down there wanted to perform a piece from Tabasco, or our concert choir wanted to perform a piece from Tabasco, or we did perform a piece from Tabasco on a concert. And a couple of members of the choir club came up to the director of choirs, Will Kessling, and I, and said, "What if we perform the entire work?" And I said, "Well, fine with me." And Will Kessling said, "We just need money." And they said, "Well, how much money do we need?" And so we sat down, figured up, put all of the numbers down for a full recording session of the critical edition, a performance, a whole 9 yards, bringing in recording engineers, everything like that. And we gave the final tally of what we would need to the treasurer of that organization. Within 3 months, he had more money than we needed. And so we were able in 2014, spring of 2014, to do a full-blown recording session of the comic opera Tabasco, one of America's unknown gems of stage. And it was a wonderful experience, being the executive producer of the recording and ending up having to be the musical director. I didn't conduct the orchestra because I was doing so many other things. Because one of our title characters ended up dropping out 2 weeks before the performance, so I had to step in and play one of the title characters 2 weeks before the performance.
Of course.
But at the University of Florida is where when I first arrived down there, my first meeting with my advisor was, do you want to continue with comic opera, or do you want to kind of go into something else? And as a musicologist, a cultural historian, we have to have various avenues of work and interest. And getting out of and not being known as the comic opera or musical theater person is so important, because you get shoehorned into that one category, and having other stuff is so important. And so I decided, I'm going to drift towards another area that I thoroughly enjoy, and that's Habsburg Vienna and the Holy Roman Empire, especially during the 18th and 19th centuries. And so a lot of my research and work now is about the fall of the Holy Roman Empire and the creation of the Austrian Empire, as well as sacred music throughout the history of Christianity, because there's a lot that we can learn, and based on how sacred music and how worship of Christians has evolved from early Christians to present day. And hymnody has, to me, become a very, very good interest, because going back earlier in this, I talked about being in Japan in 2009, and here we are in 2026. You do the math, and that hymn struck a chord then, because it was a hymn that I was vaguely familiar with. And I think now today you can go to almost some of the hymns we have throughout hymnals in various denominations are the same, and you can go into almost any Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist church, even some Catholic churches, and find Fanny Crosby hymns. You can find so many of these hymns that go across Lutheran, Anglican, Church of England, Episcopal churches. You can find so many of these hymns that just go across the denominations. And looking at them and, what do? They teach theology. They inspire worship. They inspire others to better themselves. They inspire this. They teach. Hymns and music and worship play such a pivotal role in the idea of the way that Christianity works. And, a lot of times we just tend to pass that by so many times.
Well, what's next for you? When will you finish this degree?
So I will be finished sometime in the spring or summer of 2027. I almost forgot what year it was.
Well, that's this spring.
Yes.
Coming spring.
Yes. And I've currently been approached on the Tabasco front. Paul Maffray and I Paul Maffray has approached me about doing some revision work with him, or helping him to do some revision work on his edition and updating some things with Tabasco. I'm excited for that because I know that he has a production of Tabasco scheduled coming up. I'm hoping to see more productions of Tabasco. It's very much in the vein of the Gilbert and Sullivan show. It is so within reach of high schools and community colleges. The music is so easy. And it's just wonderful. When we did it at UF, the entire 2.5 hours, people were rolling on the floor laughing.
So that would be maybe a dream of yours to get that show and take it on the road.
Oh, I would love to see a New York production of it. I think that would be wonderful. New York, see it in one of Paul's goals, and one of my goals is, because Tabasco originally opened in Boston, transferred to New York, and then embarked on a national tour. We both would love to see it played in every city that it played on the national tour. And whether that be a tour of Tabasco, or whether that just be individual community theaters or local high schools doing it, I think that would be wonderful. Because it is intrinsically connected to the history of the United States, Tabasco is. No other show, I think, has had such an impact, especially during that time, on marketing for a company. In fact, the remnants of it are still in existence today. The little bitty bottle of Tabasco that is put in MRIs and that you see at hotels and various other places, that was created specifically for this show.
That's pretty awesome.
I mean, Tabasco was a cornerstone of American musical theater when it premiered. And the librettist of Tabasco, Robert Ayres Bonnet, was one of the most prolific playwrights during his time period. In the span of about 40 to 50 years, he wrote somewhere in excess of 300 to 350 shows. And some of them I wouldn't dare to venture to perform today, but some of them are overdue, long overdue. And Robert Ayres Bonnet is long overdue for a fresh look in today's light. But going forward, there's a lot of work to be done in looking at how not only where we have come from in the past through our music and through our culture, but where we're going. And how does the past inform where we're going, and what did the trends of yesterday inform us about the trends of tomorrow? Culture, just like fashion, works in cycles.